My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we both work for the company founded by my father-in-law. Although he is now retired, my father-in-law single-handedly transformed a small construction firm into an enterprise generating $250 billion in annual revenue. He even acquired rival companies, and while his methods could be forceful, everyone admired his remarkable business acumen. James, chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised in a pampered environment and possesses a gentle nature. However, I fear his gentleness isn't suited for the cutthroat world of business. While gentle may sound pleasant, in reality, he is incredibly indecisive. I've started to doubt his suitability as a husband, let alone a CEO. James himself has admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." His lack of serious intention to take over the company has left me frustrated after 5 years of marriage. In stark contrast to James, I consider myself quite decisive. During his active years, my father-in-law appreciated this quality in me and entrusted me with various tasks. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank where I managed finances and always kept numbers in mind. I planned to become a full-time homemaker after our wedding, but my father-in-law requested that I join the construction company instead. Soon after I started working there, he began inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinions on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in such important discussions. However, as I consistently offered valuable insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Despite James being a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted as the norm by the board and my father-in-law. One day, after returning home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked. I asked angrily, "You're a key member, you should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in the board meetings. Despite his remarks, my father-in-law had been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to be grooming me as his successor. I had started enjoying my involvement in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. Whenever there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he would disappear somewhere by noon and stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to those of a CEO. Given that we were a large company with many employees, I was committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversations between us at home lessened, and our relationship became increasingly tense. Around that time, our lives took a different turn. James came home and casually mentioned, "I ran into your sister Megan today and we had lunch together." Megan, 2 years older than me, had just divorced about 6 months ago due to her infidelity. This led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. My husband James went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place as I was busy with work. With his gentle upbringing and calming personality, James managed to convince Megan's furious husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James' calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she had thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and quite indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. After the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Now single after her divorce, Megan probably saw James as a great catch, given her love for wealthy men. However, I, engrossed in work, couldn't imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company. At their wedding, she had bragged to me, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "Ah, I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, I listened as James continued. "Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." Stunned, I asked, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James' typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled at the news of her son having a child but quickly quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. She seemed more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a strong voice in the company, and since he held most of the company's shares, no executives would go against his will. I was also interested in my work and reluctant to give it up now. With my job settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile. "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband sat silently, listening to our conversation without saying anything despite being the one who caused the problem. I was appalled at his indifferent face. "It's okay to get divorced," I said, "but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly." "I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like James," I retorted to my sister with irony. She glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks in men, it's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I replied, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about was likely money. She seemed to be under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister was still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right? The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly. This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide. Even my husband seemed surprised by this. Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's, he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house? The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner. Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it. At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here. The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James. Seeing my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Ha, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but I was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, so there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So, I was bearing all the living expenses. James, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even bother to know whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, can we continue to rent this house to James? My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free. The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. Guess a house this big does have a high rent, he muttered. I can't afford that with my salary, James admitted, realizing his executive compensation would barely leave any money after paying the rent. Covering their living expenses would be hard. Over the 5 years of our marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses, leaving hardly any assets. Splitting the savings was the only option for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, now aware that the mansion she had hoped for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news. James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right? She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. Alimony, I have to pay it too. She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the earlier discussion. You said, I'll give plenty of alimony, but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low. James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well? To this, the father-in-law responded, I have no reason to be called Dad by you. He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister and was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core of my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.